This video is for the men who are doing the work to improve themselves. We get some criticism for this and some randomly misplaced hate, as what we're doing is decidedly countercultural. We're not just going to work and coming home and watching Netflix. And I've seen some really dumb attacks in my time, but recent weeks have shown me that we are now living in a full-on clown world. A few weeks ago, I saw a post on the YouTuber Hamza's community page where he was being lined up for a hit piece about toxic masculinity by The Sun, a British tabloid newspaper who for decades featured a topless woman every day on page 3. Now, there are plenty of problematic people to go after in the manosphere, most notably those who shout and wear sunglasses at night, for example, not naming any names. But I find it especially ironic that Hamza promotes things like improving your mental and physical health, making friends, building community, quitting porn and video games, avoiding drugs and alcohol, being honest with your emotions, meditation, journaling, building real, genuine connections with friends and romantic partners. Yeah, so some really toxic things that everyone should be afraid of. This is the patriarchy, this is misogyny. I've seen for a long time the odd weird news reports like this article in The Guardian which somehow associated fitness and posting about fitness on social media with having right-wing political views. The author never actually posited a mechanism for how fitness makes you right-wing. She just didn't really like fitness and didn't like fit people, so she decided to label them as right-wing. And then last week, there were news reports following a Freedom of Information Act request that the FBI had classified as extremist some very common manosphere terms. The FBI took the widely used term based, which means to be courageous and not care what people think, and made it to be, and I quote, referring to someone who has been converted to racist ideology or as a way of indicating ideological agreement. Well, I certainly hope they warmed up thoroughly and maybe did a few months of yoga classes before attempting to stretch that far. And also the term red pill, which means to wake up from a fantasy and see the real nature of things, most often used in the context of male-female relationships, somehow has now come to mean the adoption of racist or anti-Semitic or fascist beliefs. Well, that seems like it should be important news for those within the red pill community who are, for example, ethnic minorities, Jewish, anti-state power, anti-censorship, etc. And red pill has been extremely useful for me in understanding dating and relationships and my boundaries and improving my self-esteem and to enjoy better, more honest and more authentic connections with women. For anyone who wants to know more about the red pill, I would encourage you to watch the video The Truth About the Red Pill by licensed therapist Dr. Orion Teraban, which I will link in the comments. So why are these baseless attacks happening? Well, without trying to get into a bunch of conspiracy theories that we have no evidence for, let's just look at how these things function and then we can try to build a reasonable story from here. Well, when someone is labelled like this without evidence, first and foremost, it's a way of shutting down debate. If you were, for example, someone who looked at the small concentration of men who typically held power throughout history over both men and women, and you said, okay, I think all men are like this top tier of men who are kings and sultans who have all the power, and I'm going to express my outrage at my oppression and those like me against this apex against all men, because all men are like this, then it doesn't matter which man is the recipient of your hate. And you'll certainly don't want any man raising his self-worth and believing that he should build life on his own terms. But you can't really engage with him on his own beliefs, because while there are certainly some crazies out there, most people in these communities are reasonable human beings. They're not even saying something as severe as, say, taking female empowerment quotes and swapping the genders. But here's the thing. You don't actually have to deal with what people say and think and believe if you can just point at them and say, man bad. Most people don't really think through what they're told. And human brains work on the basis of believing things not on evidence but on the number of times that we hear them. The Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels said, if you repeat a lie often enough, people will come to believe it. So evidence really isn't required. If you just publicly attack and shame them, then you'll win plenty of people over to your side. You don't need to educate the populace to understand things like context and nuance, if you can just point at people you don't like and call them evil. Shaming tactics, such as labeling someone with an ambiguous term without evidence that they can't really defend against. You could say, where have I said something that's misogynist? Where have I said something that's sexist? And then they don't need to come up with evidence for this. But it works because we are wired as human beings to care what our tribe thinks about us. And I don't care how much someone claims to be independent and not care what anyone else thinks. It's part of who we are as human beings to care what our tribe thinks about us. And so if someone can turn the tribe against us, it can result in the worst oppression possible. Suicides and acts of extreme violence often follow shaming events. And this is well documented in the book that I'm currently reading, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, by John Ronson, which I'd encourage you to check out. And I know the power of shame myself. The young me who protested my parents' dysfunction and abuse was shamed into submission and silence. They were not the problem, I was the problem. They didn't have an attitude problem, I had an attitude problem. And then I married my first ever girlfriend who, again, eventually came to shame me into thinking that I was a horrible, ugly person who didn't deserve any better. And in both cases, I lived as a slave to the whims of other people, trying to please people who would never be pleased. And it was a horrible way to live. So if you're a man who is involved in these communities and you find yourself in the firing line, just because you're trying to improve yourself, what is the solution? Am I making this video to say, oh, this is so unfair and these people who attack us should be more understanding? No, because I don't think these people are capable of it. Simple answers please simple minds. Being told what to think is vastly more comfortable than having to think for yourself for the vast majority of people. So what do we do? I want to share this quote by Govinda Bhogal. The combination of the digital age constantly exposing us to new outrages and cultural elites constantly creating new outrages out of nothing has skyrocketed the number of outrages that we now face. In a world prickling with provocations, we cannot let our sensitivities roam free. If we allow ourselves to be goaded by every visible indignation, we'll be endlessly distracted from our goals and easily controlled by emotional manipulators like trolls, disinformation agents, and demagogues. So, do not play the game. If you're a man working on making yourself better in a way which is genuinely authentic, that's not going to fit into mainstream narrative. So don't take seriously the accusations of those that you know are totally full of shit. Instead, build real, deep, honest and meaningful friendships with people that you know have your best interests at heart, who will point out your mistakes when they see you making them, but who will also defend you when you're being attacked unfairly. Let every word and every action you take be fully from your own heart, and then live in peace in the company of those who know and love that heart of yours. Thank you for listening.